Okay, welcome to Into the Channel podcast, primarily about women's football. Before we hit the pitch, if you enjoy the show or love women's football as much as we all do, come kick it with us already. We do this every single week, spanning the wide world of women's football. We continue our span with our Olympics football coverage. Subscribe, follow YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to watch or listen. Links to all of our socials in the show notes of this episode. I am your host, Dino DeCespedes, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Grant Engel. What is up, man?
I'm feeling fantastic, buddy. And part of the reason I'm feeling fantastic is I have the pleasure of introducing our guest today, who is an educator, researcher, PhD student, and journalist. You can find her excellent work in The Guardian, where she's a freelance football writer and regular contributor to The Guardian's women's football newsletter, Moving the Goalposts. And if you're looking to stay informed during the Olympic tournament, and we know you are, she'll be there in Paris covering the games. It is my great honor to welcome to the show, Júlia Belas Trindade.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk about Brazil, to talk about women's football. It's one of my favorite things in life. So yes, I'm really happy to be here.
Well, you're in the right place. Júlia, as Grant mentioned, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to get into this team. I live in Orlando, which is sort of like Brazil North for the footballing world. You guys are very well represented here on my Orlando pride, but I do want to focus on the national team and their journey into the Olympics. I want to start big picture first. So this team has had some success, a lot of Copa America success. World Cup obviously had some success historically, but this past 23 World Cup bounced out in the group stage. So it's been a little bit of up and down, although the team is loaded with talent from top to bottom. So going into this tournament, obviously 12 really, really good teams. Everybody's expecting a very competitive tournament. What do you feel this Brazilian team's ceiling is?
That's a really tough question because, again, as you said, Brazil has so much talent. A lot of the players play in the United States, so they know how important it is to have a strong league, to have a strong team. They have been playing against some of the best players in the world for years now. And I would say they are prepared to play the Olympics as well as they were prepared to play the World Cup. But there's a ceiling and it's tough to talk about it because if we talk about the big picture in the late 90s, early 2000s, Brazil were one of the best teams in the world. But with the development of women's football recently, we were left behind. And this is something that Federation is saying that they are trying to change. You know, the players are really eager to put Brazil back into the top spot in women's football, but it's difficult. So yeah, hopefully, I would say that we can reach the quarterfinals. But again, I said the same thing about the World Cup and we didn't. So it's really a surprise. But hopefully getting to knockout stages and then being prepared mentally to play some of the best teams in the world. That's the goal.
Yeah, so you guys obviously are in an extremely tough group. There's been a lot of talk here in the States about how our group is the group of death with Australia, Germany, and Zambia. I don't know, though. I feel like your group with Japan, Spain, and Nigeria, that feels awfully group of deathy to me. You talk about the possible ceiling, making it out of the group stage, making it to the knockout rounds. In your mind, in order to do that, who is the player or maybe couple of players who have to really come through for you to reach that ceiling?
Look, we cannot talk about Brazil without talking about Marta. Of course, she's, brilliant, best footballer, women's football player in history, and we all know everything that is to know about her.
Mm-hmm.
But, she has a different role in the Brazilian national team nowadays. It's kind of similar to what Megan Rapinoe did in the World Cup, more of a leadership position than necessarily the player that is going to decide every single game. But yeah, one of the best things about the Brazilian national team nowadays is the defense. The defense has been more solid than what we used to have. We all know Brazil for the forwards. We all know Brazil for really good midfield. So having a good defense, a strong defense is really important. I feel like Tassiane, who plays for Houston Dash, is one of my favorite younger names in this team, because she's a really interesting player. She has played for Corinthians for a while. She has the experience of playing in the national team already, but she struggled with some injuries, so she's coming back to the national team in a major tournament, and it's going to be a really interesting position for her to be in, because it's her and Rafael who plays for Orlando Pride, and they are both really, really solid defenders, really versatile defenders as well. So I feel like Brazil having a strong defense will be really important, because again, we are playing against Spain, and we all know what they can do when they keep the ball. And I think the defense should be one of Brazil's main strong points in the Olympics. And we all know that saying, right? The forwards win games, but defenses win tournaments. I don't think we win the tournament, but we can surely try.
Super interesting. Yeah, obviously we've gotten to see Tatiana up close a little bit more since she moved to Houston, and she's still so young, just so exciting. Like, she's probably still growing into her professional athlete body. I wanted to ask a question specifically about the roster construction. You mentioned the defenders. So I think by my count, 7 forwards on the Brazilian side, 6 defenders, only 3 midfielders.
Yes.
Did you notice anything? Did that sort of perk your radars a little bit about like how the team was constructed?
The main thing about the Olympics is that you cannot take as many players as you can to a World Cup or Copa America, for example. So you have to have versatile players. So if we look at the roster, of course, we have 7 forwards, which is a lot considering that we have only 18 players. But at the same time, some of these forwards can play a little bit behind and can reinforce the midfield. But again, we still have a pretty forward midfield. So I'm curious to see, and not curious in the best way, but I'm curious to see how these players will be able to hold themselves defensively, especially playing against 2 really strong midfields. Like, the Japanese are really strong in the midfield. They are really strong in building plays. The Spanish as well, the Nigerians as well. So it will be difficult for Brazil to populate this midfield when they are thinking so much about moving forward all the time. But again, looking at the Brazilian national team throughout history, our strong point is always the offensive side. It's always like building up the plays. It's always individual plays as well. So it's really important for us to have, for example, Adriana, who has been scoring left and right at Orlando. Kerolin's coming back from injury. So some of the players are really strong in that sense. And then, of course, the main question is who is going to score the goals. And I think they know better than me who can try. But yeah, it's an interesting roster for sure.
Okay, Julia, so you set the table for me perfectly here. I've contained myself as long as I possibly can. You mentioned scoring goals. You mentioned Kerolin. I got the opportunity last season when the Courage played in Seattle. I was sitting on the right side where she was playing. And I will say, when Kerolin is playing against the team that you are rooting for, it's a terrifying experience. She won the NWSL MVP. We all know what kind of player she is. That was the biggest thing that jumped out to me when they named the roster, and she's on there. Obviously, she's coming off a devastating ACL injury. What's the news coming out of Brazil? Like, can we expect Kerolin to play against Nigeria, or is she going to kind of be eased in, or do we know yet?
We still don't know. The head coach, Arthur Elias, he said that he followed some of her training. He was in touch with the Courage medical team, and they all say she's ready to play. And she's been working with the ball for a few months now. She's been easing back into the pitch. I think it was only a matter of trying to preserve her a little bit, since he was really close to the Olympics, try not to put her on the pitch before the Olympics so that she could go into the Olympics, have a little time with the national team, and when she comes back to the NWSL, she'll be like fully prepared. I don't know if she may ease into playing against Nigeria on the opening game, but I don't think she will be starting that game, but who knows. We haven't seen her play in a really long time. We don't know exactly if she's 100% ready to go back onto the pitch. And of course, you have to get back into rhythm. You have to get back into contact with your teammates and everything. So it's really important that the Brazilian national team is already in Brazil getting ready for the Olympics. And then they travel really close to the beginning of the games to Paris. But yeah, it's to Bordeaux actually. But yeah, we still don't know how much Kerolin is going to play. But if she goes back with the same form that she had in the last season of the NWSL, absolutely, she'll be really, really dangerous.
I had a follow-up question. You mentioned something earlier, Julia, asking the question, who's going to score the goals? So I think when I looked at this roster, obviously there's so many talented Brazilian players playing all over the world. Interesting omissions, though. No Debinha, no Jace. So when you think about who's going to score the goals, who do you think is going to score the goals? Or who are you looking to be the goal scorer here?
Look, I think one of the main names that we've been calling for in the Brazilian national team and hasn't had as many opportunities, especially in big tournaments, was Gabi Nunes, the Levante player. She is a really good forward, a real reference, you know, that player that's going to be inside the box and try to find the best openings to score a goal. So I think she's one of the main references in the attacking side of Brazil. But at the same time, you have Adriana that can score beautifully with set pieces and things like that. But yeah, it's one of the main questions, one of the main concerns, because even though we see 7 forwards in the roster, they are mostly players who build up the play, not necessarily the ones who will get the ball inside the box and just score, try to score as much as they can. But again, Brazil has a really versatile team. So, for example, Kathellen has scored some goals with Orlando, before with Arsenal as well. She's a really good header, so whenever there's a corner kick or something like that, she will be inside the box to try to score. Antonia has scored her first goal with the national team recently as well. Tamires is always a strong choice as well. So, you know, anything can happen. But it was one of the main concerns for the Brazilian national team in the World Cup. The fact that even though we had, for example, Beatriz Nerato, Ari Borges, you know, Debinha, they weren't able to score when we needed, specifically the game against Jamaica that we needed to win and we didn't. Yeah, it's quite it's difficult to be a Brazilian fan, to be honest, because you kind of feel like you should win everything. Not necessarily that you deserve to win, but we demand winning, a lot of winning. We demand goals, we demand everything. And seeing Brazil not being the favorites all the time, it's still difficult, still hurts a little bit. But yeah, hopefully the forwards will work well together and then we'll get a few more goals in these Olympics.
I gotta say, this is the first time I'll ever use this phrase, and it's a phrase I could only use in the women's side of the game. I guess USA football and Brazilian football are similar in that sense. I would say that's probably the end of it. But yeah, that kind of demand of you go into every match and you look up and down the roster and you look at the other team and usually think we have the more talented side going into this game.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel too bad because nobody scored on Jamaica in the group stage. So
yes,
you know, it wasn't just Brazil.
Yeah, no, and for Brazil, it's a matter of mentality. Contrary to the United States, you know, we all talk about the mind power that the U.S. women's national team has of, you know, they just get into the pitch and they say, we are going to win and no one can stop us until someone does. But even when they're losing, they don't lose their cool. They always play as if it's their God given right to win that game, and that's something that I feel Brazil should learn. And I think Pia Sundhag, being a former US coach, she tried to bring that into Brazil a little bit, but it wasn't enough. Brazilians, when they fail to score in the first half, usually the second half they are a bit unfocused, they lose their cool a lot, and that's not great, especially if you go into knockout stages where, you know, if you make one mistake, and we've had that with the US before, so I don't even want to think about facing the US in the Olympics. But yeah, if you go into the knockout stages, it's just one tiny detail can change the game. And for Brazil, I feel like, especially after a really poor World Cup, the idea is to shake that off and just go into the Olympics trying to feel like they need to win and carrying that with them.
I like how you kind of nod to the team's mentality there. And you have to think about, you know, with younger players, that's something that you need to kind of bring along and that they're going to get with some experience. We've already hit on a few of those players who are just supremely talented, who you're kind of looking for to come through. Can we spotlight again, though, if we want to think about like a breakout star, like somebody who maybe world football fans aren't too familiar with? Is there a young player in that like 20 to 23, 24 years old on the roster? Who's a potential breakout star amongst those young players you have?
I feel like especially amongst the Brazilians who still play in Brazil, one of the names that you should keep your eyes peeled for is Duda Sampaio. She was really good in the Brazilian Championship a couple of years ago, and now she plays for Corinthians, who are the best team in Brazilian football. And she is a really, really interesting player to watch, and she's a midfielder. She's a really strong midfielder. I don't think we'll be seeing her playing in Brazil for too long, but she is one of my favorite players in the national team who still play for in Brazilian clubs. And it's really interesting to see her play and to see her grow into this footballer that is going into the Olympics. She's going to be one of the important names in this team. And Arthur Elias, the head coach of Brazil, he used to coach Corinthians. He coached Corinthians for a really long time. He built Corinthians into what they are today, many, many times champions of the Brazilian Championship, of the Copa Libertadores. They are the Brazilian club that keep calling for World Club Cup, because they feel like they need to fight to play against stronger teams and to see if they are the best. They held world records for continuous wins, sequential wins in the world. So Arthur Elias was kind of the name that brought them to this place. But of course, one thing is to coach a really well-structured club in Brazil, where women's football is not really well-structured, comparing to coaching the not best national team in the world. So I feel like for Brazil, the challenge right now is to be between humble and understand that you cannot do everything. You have to focus on your strong points, and you will fail, but you cannot let yourself get beaten by every time you miss a ball or something. And having the confidence to say, no, but we still can win this, and we can still go in strong and try to play as equally as we can against these teams that are, brilliant. And we are in the Spanish group, so they are just brilliant to watch, and they have brilliant players, some of the best players in the world. So it's quite difficult to see Brazil beating Spain, but it's not impossible. But I wouldn't bet on that. Like, I wouldn't recommend.
Well, both Grant and I retired from betting on this, so we just kind of want to watch the action. Quick follow-up to that. So 9 of the players on the 18-person roster play professionally in Brazil. Corinthians, who you mentioned, 6 players from Corinthians. Do you feel like that might be a little bit of an advantage, or could there be some chemistry stuff with essentially half the team, playing domestically and a third of the team playing for Corinthians specifically, and then the rest obviously spread out between Europe and the USA?
There are 2 points of view to this. The first one, of course, it's an advantage to have so many players who have been playing together, who know each other really well, who know the coach, who know the style, the way that he likes to play, that he likes to build the team. And of course, we have one Corinthians representative in every sector of the pitch. So they can be those players who are going to translate his thoughts, who know him so well, who have been playing with him for such a long time, that they will be those players to say, no, even if I don't hear what he's saying, I think he'll want us to do this, this, and that, and they will be really connected. I feel like that's a really strong point, but at the same time, considering the big picture of women's football, it's really difficult to say that, for example, Brazilian women's football is successful when you have one club or 2, 3, 4 clubs that have a better structure. And of course, Corinthians are way ahead of the curve in terms of women's football than the rest of the Brazilian clubs. And one of the things that we have been trying to build in Brazil is a stronger league, a stronger sense of, you don't have to be a Corinthians or outside of Brazil to become a football player, a professional football player. It's important to have structure all over the country, and Brazil is huge. Even the clubs that are not Corinthians, the strongest clubs in Brazil are focused in the southeast, and in the south are concentrated there, and some of the players are from the northeast, from the center west of the country. So it's important to praise their good job, because of course they have been doing everything they can, and they have been winning so much, and they have been doing great. And of course, Arthur Elias and these players deserve to be in the national team because they are the best, or amongst the best, in Brazil. But at the same time, it's difficult to say that Brazilian women's football is growing because only Corinthians and a handful of other teams are growing. But yeah, at the same time, it's important for the National League to have big players, national team players playing within the country. So for example, Cristiane, she didn't get the call up, but she was playing. She went back to the national team after a few years outside of it with Pia Sundhage, and Cristiane plays for Flamengo, who have been getting calls from the fans to host some games in the Maracanã Stadium. And, it's really important to have some big names in the National League so that it draws attention to the club, it draws attention to the good and the bad, and then we can build women's football with them there. But at the same time, again, even the Brazilian players who are not in Brazil, most of them are in the United States, so they know each other, they play against each other, like half of the team at Orlando for the weather. So they hang out all the time, they play together. It's really interesting to see that it's a really well-connected team, even outside of the national team.
I've joked with Dino. We had Angelina up here in Seattle for a little while. I thought she looked good in stretches. She had some injury issues that she had to deal with. Then she goes to Orlando. Something tells me, I'm just going to make a hunch. I don't know Angelina, but something tells me she probably prefers the weather in Orlando compared to Seattle, Washington up here in the Northwest. Just a hunch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I interviewed Kathellen once after she moved to Orlando, and she was here in London in the UK, and I was like, you probably love the weather. Yeah, she was like, yeah, that weighed on the decision because it's sunny all the time. I imagine I've never been, but yeah, I love it.
Oh, we're gonna have to definitely get you out here. You mentioned the coach Arthur Elias a couple of times. What do you feel like are Elias's strengths and maybe also his weaknesses, considering the international format that we're approaching here?
Yes, I feel like one of his strengths is the fact that he's a real winning coach. Almost arrogant in the sense of, I don't like to lose, I don't want to lose, I don't feel like we are going to lose. Even in his first interview as the head coach of the Brazilian national team, he was saying, we have to stop saying that Brazil are not the best team in the world. If I'm here, I believe we can be, which, you can say that, but we have to also be kind of realistic about our conditions. But at the same time, yeah, he knows a lot of these players, even the players who are not in Brazil anymore. He has either coached them or coached against them for a really long time in Brazil. He's seen them grow up into the footballers that they are today, so he's really familiar with the history, with the importance of football for Brazil. And one of the things that people used to criticize Pia a lot was the fact that, she was so focused on the renovation of the national team that she wouldn't necessarily, for example, give a proper farewell to Formiga, or stopped calling up Cristiane without taking her to the Olympics, even though she's the top scorer in Olympics. And these were some of the criticisms that she had to deal with when she was in Brazil. And of course, there's strong points and weak points in each one of them. But with Arthur, I think his main strength is the fact that he is a coach that knows how to talk the language of football in Brazil. He knows how to raise to the players the importance of winning for Brazilians, the importance of, wearing the Brazilian jersey, and of course the fact that he has either coached them or coached against them is really, really important. And then I think his main weakness is the fact that this is his first international experience, and of course we have to value Brazilian football as much as we can, but compared to other countries, compared to other leagues specifically, Brazil are way, way behind. And when we look at a coach that only has experience playing within Brazil or within South America, so, the Libertadores, we see that Brazil was still the main winners, Copa America, Brazil still dominate quite easily in the continent, and especially Corinthians dominate quite easily within the country. So for him, I feel like it's a really difficult experience not to be favorites anymore. And I don't know how well he's going to deal with that during the Olympics in such a strong group with Spain, Japan, and Nigeria. And, you have to balance the confidence with some realism and just be real and understand that, okay, maybe we don't have enough great players to stop Aitana Bonmati from doing what she does or something like that. But at the same time, trying to find alternatives and building that confidence within the players.
I think it's a really interesting question is, can a kind of singular coach, a coach who's had that kind of success at a club level, can he actually be a part of accelerating the culture of women's football in Brazil? Him coming out and saying, hey, we don't look at ourselves as underdogs. We're Brazil, that we're playing football. Like, we should be amongst the favorites here. Look at our roster, things of that nature. And so, Julia, I came across your work. You wrote a wonderful piece for The Guardian about the importance of the 2027 World Cup being hosted in Brazil. Anybody listening to the show, you should absolutely go to The Guardian, find that piece, and read it. But I was hoping you might be able to give people a little preview of what they can expect and kind of your overarching thoughts around the importance of the 2027 World Cup.
Yeah, so first of all, go to read the text, subscribe to Moving the Goalposts. It's a really cool newsletter. We talk about football from all over the world. And I feel like, for me, first of all, for me as a journalist who has been covering women's football for years now, I feel like bringing attention to Brazilian women's football without just focusing on the national team, but also thinking about the structure, thinking about the eyes of the whole world will be on Brazil for the next couple of years leading up to the World Cup. So people are going to pay more attention to how Brazil deals with women's football, and it's not great. I talked about, the difficult structures that we have in clubs. I've written about really ugly stories, even in The Guardian, really ugly stories involving coaches, involving really important teams in Brazil. So it's really difficult. Sometimes you kind of feel like you are talking to people who are talking to the converted, people who follow women's football, people who already know about all of the issues and about all of the problems and about all of the joys. So now we are going to bring more attention, not only within Brazil, but also from outside of Brazil. And at the same time, Brazil are going to look really hard into what other countries are doing to try to develop the game. One of the main points of the Brazilian bid is they use the slogan, a natural choice. Like, it's natural for Brazilians to be passionate about football. It's natural for Brazilians to be involved in football. And I'm doing a PhD and I research women's football and media representation in Brazil. And one of the interesting things is the fact that we bought so much into the idea that Brazilians love football and are passionate about football that no one questions how that started, why women's football is not in the same level. So just for context, a Brazilian president, a Brazilian dictator in 1941 banned football. It became illegal for women to practice football, rugby, fighting sports, and other kinds of sports. And that lasted almost 40 years, so until 1979 when that law was revoked. So when we think about the period when, Pelé was winning 3 World Cups, Brazil was doing really well in the men's national team, the clubs were growing into things that people were really passionate about. It's almost like a religion in Brazil to support a football club. Women's football wasn't even just suffering prejudice. People were actively fighting against it. So now it's not necessarily natural that men's football became what it became. There was a lot of investment, a lot of attention, a lot of support. So for women's football to grow, it has to have a good environment as well. And there's this idea that Brazilians, especially in the early 2000s, like the 2007 Pan American Games, the 2007 World Cup, the 2008 Olympics, the Brazilian players, it was our best generation. We had Marta Cristiane and Formiga playing beautifully. We had a really strong national team. We were runner-ups in the World Cup. We had Olympic medals, and still there was this idea that Brazil needed to win something important in women's football in order to be able to receive the better conditions, the better pay, everything that they had to do in order to achieve these goals. So the idea in Brazil is quite opposite of what it was supposed to be. You have to win something to be able to have structure to actually win something. And back in the day when women's football, you had the US, you had Germany, and then Japan showing up like in 2011, some other countries investing a little bit more. But in the 2000s, early 2010s, Brazil could still fight. We had the natural quote-unquote talent, and we had the best players in the world, and we had a really, really strong team. But it's not about just that anymore. You also have to be really tactical, technical, you have to have strong physical conditions, you have to be fit all the time, you have to be able to deal with the intensity of the game. And that's something that Brazil was left behind a lot in that sense. And of course, after decades of prejudice, lack of investment, illegality, everything, it's really difficult for Brazil to catch up right away right now. But hosting the World Cup, it will be really interesting for people to pay attention to Brazilian women's football, to pay attention to the league, to have a stronger selling point for example, bringing Flamengo to play at the Maracanã when they have Cristiane playing for them. And the club hasn't done that yet, which is, I still can't believe it. So, to bring in more people into the stadiums to watch the games, to fighting more for better conditions for the players and for those to come. Because, we lost a really good generation. Marta is going to her last Olympics, right? She says she's going to her last Olympics right now. Cristiane was still fighting for a place in the Olympics, and they are 30-something years old. And, the next generations, the Duda Sampaio, Tarciane, they are the ones that had under 20 national team to play for, under 20 clubs in Brazil to play for. They are the first generation that had youth training, that had better conditions. So playing the United States with great structure, or some of them like Jay-Z played in Europe with great structure. So the next generations are building up on what these women, these 30-something, 40-something years old, did for so long. And it's really sad that we didn't get to win anything with them, maybe the Olympics with Marta. But it's really important to think about the future of women's football in Brazil. And this World Cup will help us build solid foundation for that. And I feel like even if it inspires a few girls to pick up a ball and start kicking it around, that's going to be amazing already.
Let's definitely hope for that. And yeah, pretty surprising to hear that 2 silver medals, 2004, 2008, second place finished in the World Cup 2007, and maybe one of the greatest players of all time, Marta in her prime. Was it enough to, round everybody up and get some investment? It sounds like, there was some moving of the goalposts down there as well, unfortunately. But I want to have a little bit of fun with this tournament. So I know you mentioned quarterfinals is, maybe where the hopes are. Let's get out of the group stage. Tough group, we already mentioned that. Let's imagine that Brazil earns a medal. We were not going to say which medal, but when it's all said and done, Brazil is one of the teams on the podium. What do you think the recipe would be for that?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I feel like if I had the answer, I would be at Arthur Elias' place. I don't know. Honestly, I feel like we know that Brazil are not the favorites, not even close to the favorites. But the times when they play really well, it's all about connecting really well on the pitch. So really good communication between the sectors. The players help each other quite a lot. So it's kind of this idea and this philosophy that we've always had, and Pia Sundhage tried to build more on that. But I feel like, for example, if you look at the Finalissima that we played against England at Wembley, Brazil, they were communicating, they considered a goal really early on, but they never stopped trying. I feel like for Brazilians, not only in football, but in life, it's all about never stop trying. Just keep going until the end, and don't let yourself get beaten up. If it's not working right now, it may work in the next minute, in the next 5 minutes. So I feel like that's the main thing, especially in such a short tournament like the Olympics. It's only a few games, you only have a few shots to get to a medal. It is possible, and it's one of the tournaments where it's most possible, because there are so many factors involved that, maybe Spain have a bad day and we can beat them in the group. That puts us well ahead into knockout stages, maybe even first in the group. If you get first in the group, you have a better chance at playing a team that's not going to be as difficult. There are so many factors involved. It's crazy to predict it. But I love to say, if it were impossible, no one would be rooting, no one would like football. I feel like football is soccer for Americans. I feel like the beauty of it is the fact that anything can be possible, anything can happen. And, we see it over and over again. It's a really, really beautiful sport.
That it is. You'll get no argument here. I want to ask about your PhD work a little more specifically, if that's okay with you.
Oh, sure. So basically, I'm researching the media representation of footballers in Brazil. I'm in the data collection stage, which is really, really fun. I get to talk to some of the players. I get to talk to some of the people that I'm a huge, huge fan that I've seen play or that I've really wanted to see play one day. And basically, I want to understand how the players feel about the media coverage of women's football in Brazil. It's not a huge media coverage. It's not nearly enough. But at the same time, we see it's growing so fast. And of course, with the announcement of hosting the World Cup in 27, it's going to grow even more. I want to understand how the players feel about it. What do they think has to change? What do they feel it should be better? How do they feel if there's any prejudice, gender-based or racial prejudice against them? I want to understand if they feel comfortable talking about their sexuality in interviews and things like that. So yeah, I'm basically asking them a bunch of questions. Hopefully until the World Cup I'll have the results published somewhere to see for people to read. But it's a really fascinating topic, and as someone who works in the media, it's quite interesting to see that the perceptions that the players have of our job. And sometimes I question myself all the time, my journalistic work and the writing that I do, the events that I cover. It's really fun being in Europe right now because, of course, I moved to the UK in 2022 when, the Euros had just happened when I started my PhD. So everyone was talking about women's football. I've been to Champions League finals. I've been to the World Cup last year, and it was incredible. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I feel like women's football has only been growing, since I started the PhD, which is really cool. And I feel really, really privileged to be able to live that and also think critically about it, not only as a journalist, but also doing research that hopefully will bring better conditions, better coverage for the players in the future. So
that's fantastic. We are very much looking forward to reading that.
Or having you on the show to talk about it. Doors always open. You let us know once you hit save and print and it's done. Please come back, and we want to hear everything that you were able to find out about that.
Maybe in person. The World Cup is there, and the men's World Cup is there. I also love men's football. I also watch a lot of men's football. I was watching the Euros recently, and the World Cup is going to be a fun one in North America. I really want to go.
Yeah, who's got time for that? I'm really looking forward to 27, to be honest.
Yeah, start saving up. Brazil is expensive sometimes, especially traveling between the cities, but it's going to be a fun holiday for any Europeans, North Americans who want to go. It's going to be a fun one.
That is definitely part of the plan. We are on the hunt for any media company who wants to maybe help us with some of those costs. I mean, I think we do a pretty good show, so I think maybe they could help sponsor some of our activities down there, but the saving has already begun for Dino and I to get down there as well.
Yeah, amazing. And if you need places to stay in São Paulo or Salvador, text me, but the queue is really long, so decide that right away.
Fair enough. Right. You're a fountain of information, Julia. This has been awesome.
As I told you, it's my life over the last 2 years now, and it's all I think about.
Understandable. Yeah. Makes sense.
Love it. I'm just excited for the tournament. Julia, I think you mentioned Germany briefly. There's some really fun Germany-Brazil vibes. Obviously, football DNA through and through. Both teams started the World Cup with a huge win. Germany was 6-0, Brazil was 4-0, and then both got bounced on some bad luck later in the group stage. And I think both now are entering this Olympic field with kind of high hopes. And I think that the thing about Brazil specifically that kind of has me a little excited is when they look good, they look really good. It might just be in a short stretch where you're just like, oh my God, what do you do with this team? I don't like to get too crazy with the predictions, but I think Brazil and Germany, there could be some synergy there brewing where we might see both of those teams kind of rise up here in this tournament that I'm really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And they are going into the Olympics feeling that they need to recover and quickly. And the Olympics, it's great that they have the Olympics in such a short period after the World Cup, because then it's not about changing everything. It's about doing what you can to try to build on such a poor performance. And with Germany, we've seen the difference in the quality of the women's, not the quality of the women's team, but they changed generations. We've seen players come and go. We've seen a younger generation starting to become this powerhouse again. And I feel like Germany, Brazil, the US are in such an interesting position because they are transitioning generations at this point. And it's really good to see because we have some younger players, but we also get the chance to see some of our older favorites, to say goodbye to them, to bid them farewell. So it's been an interesting couple of years for women's football, especially these countries that have been powerhouses over the past 20 years, trying to continue in this position. And when you see, for example, Spain growing so beautifully, England as well. Also for the Olympics, when you look at the fact that, for example, England are not going to be playing, Sweden are not going to be playing, it's going to be really different to what we've seen so far. And it's going to give a little bit of space for these teams that are not necessarily favorites in the World Cup to try to grow into favorites in the Olympics. And of course, happy to see Australia playing again because they were brilliant in the World Cup. I feel like they can do a lot in the Olympics as well. So yeah, it's going to be a really, really good tournament. I'm really excited.
Absolutely. I mean, just a completely stacked field, 1 to 12. We had wonderful journalist Samantha Lewis from Australia on the show.
Love her.
And she had mentioned that Australia is ranked 12th in the world. And she said, so I guess that means might be the 12th best team in the tournament. I mean, I just don't even know. I don't even know how to calculate that. Like, okay, Australia's the weakest team in the tournament? Like, that doesn't even seem to compute in my mind.
You talked about the death group before, and I honestly cannot see a death group in this.
Yeah.
Everything is a death group because, even Group A, we haven't talked a lot about it, but Colombia are really strong, France are really strong, Canada have not been really strong, but they are really strong.
Yep.
It's not easy to go to the knockout stages in either of these groups. And even Spain, that we think are a given that they're going to be first in the group, it may not happen. They may fumble against Brazil or Japan or Nigeria. If they play one bad game, anything can happen. So, I won't turn off my TV because I don't think I'll be able to go to every single game. And of course, Olympics, anything is happening, but I will be with one eye in the football the whole time because it's going to be so fun.
Well, Julia, we're hoping for Brazil to make a deep run so we have an excuse to invite you back and then talk a little bit more Brazilian football. But with that said, I think we did it. This has been another episode of Into the Channel. Thank you for watching, listening, liking, subscribing, just plain hanging out as we get prepped for this massive tournament this summer. Remember to like if you liked and subscribe or follow Into the Channel, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you like to watch or listen. Links to all of our socials in the show notes. Big thank you to our special guest, Júlia Belas Trindade, and to my co-host, Mr. Grant Engel. I appreciate you, man.
Likewise, buddy. Thank you again, Julia, for joining us. And, I don't know the Portuguese way to say beautiful podcasting, but I am looking forward to Jogo Bonito in the Olympics this year. So thank you again, Julia.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a really fun chat. And of course, call me, text me. Hopefully we can talk a little bit more good things about Brazil. It's going to be fun.
Excellent. We'll take you up on that. And thank you to everybody for watching. We will see you guys very soon.